In 1884, D.S. Tracy and his wife Rebecca Ebenezer Rich and son Sam Singleton and Jim Whitaker, John Snyder, and families came. George M. Bronson and his family moved into Dam Ranch 7 miles west. It's what the Spencers call the Bronson. It's really the Bronze. That's okay. I forgive you for your bad pronunciation. Together, these pioneers paved the way for our community. Some laid down their lives in the struggle. So besides the Yost children in the new cemetery on the east side of the village lay John Snyder, Dave Graham, and the Cooley's little girl. Then little Mary Tracy and Walter P. Holt. In 1886, the Yost LDS branch of the Park Valley Ward was organized at Yost with Ebenezer Richardson as presiding elder. Sunday school was held at William Tracy's home. In 1887, there was built a log house with rough floors and slab benches. In 1890, the organization was changed to a branch of the Alma Ward Cash Stake, and John Boosh was a presiding elder, pronounced or spelled B-E-U-S. During this time, and under the leadership of Brother Boosh, a rock meeting house was built, which is still in use. In the meantime, many other families have made their homes in and near the Yost area. There were the Shangles, Mr. John Blythe, the kind-hearted Scotchman, the Chadwicks, Hiram Yates, Miss Rilla Traceley and her 4 sons, Rudolph Walters, and a bunch of nice Montgomery families. The Oman brothers, that's a familiar name. Orson Reed, which is a brother of Hemley's. John Cronk and his wife Hertha. There was also a number of families who had settled in the Junction, Raft River, and Johnson Creek areas who were members of the LDS branch and mingled with us in all neighborly and social functions. The Lynns, Andersons, and Walter Holtz, and Lewis Howells and John Booth. The Charlie Randalls, Andrew Callahan, and Fred Rower. And later the Gills, Gilberts, Meekums, Wrights, and Teeters. Some have said there are no friends like old friends. The time came in 1903 when the branch became a ward, and Thomas Henry Blackburn as bishop, George M. Bronson as first counselor, and Joseph A. Montgomery as second counselor. Bishop Blackburn with his family had been called by stake president William T. Jack to move here from Grouse Creek to act as bishop of the Yost Ward. Joseph A. Montgomery was the second bishop of the ward and was followed after many years by Chester Loveland. In 1916, the Raft River Stake was organized and Yost Ward became part of that stake. The first school, which was held in George Creek, now Yost, was in the old log house with Lewis Carpenter, commonly known as Louis Desport, as teacher. He boarded with D.S. Tracy. He carried little Dave on his back so there would be enough pupils to hold school. The mail was first brought to Yost once a week from Bridge. Mr. Hardy was the carrier. The first post office was the home of Charles Yost. Later, D.S. Tracy had the post office. Still later, Mr. and Mrs. Hiram Yates were for a long time the postmaster and postmistress. The mail came from Alma, Idaho then, and then it changed and came through Stanrod from Bridge. Later still, it came clear from Kelton, Utah. The first years of the settlement of Yost, the settlers traveled by team and wagon to Corinne, Utah, for all supplies. Finally, William Tracy put up a store in his home on the place now known as the Lydia Yates place. Has anybody heard of that? The Lydia Yates. That would be in Yost. In the year 1887, there were so many jackrabbits, they ate up most of all the farmers' crops. On a moonlit night, they came into fields to feed on the alfalfa stacks, and one could kill 25 rabbits in a matter of minutes. Anyway, that's a little bit about the history. One other thing that was interesting in here as I read this book, this is written by the Reeds. I do not know to this day why I did not get to go with Father and Uncle Charlie Wagner with my 2 beloved cousins, George and Benny Goe, G-O-E, on this fantastic treasure hunt to Worthington Springs. They returned a few days with several specimens of supposed opals, and Uncle Charlie tried to have them as assay. Father was again invited to go with them on another prospecting tour, but declined. He was now on the verge of spring, and he was expecting to do a bunch of farming. So he referred them to a place in the City of Rocks where mica was to be found. And I've been in that mica hole. Many of you have. And also a treasure box which had been hidden by some Wells Fargo robbers. My father was glad to give them his interest in the prospects, if only they would leave him alone for the time being. He was trying to get his spring work done. But I thought that was interesting because many of you know where that mica mine is.
And we want to know where the box for the
I found that a long time ago, but I didn't want to tell anybody because I figured Wells Fargo would lay claim to it. So I just let them go one at a time. You know, and these boots were some of the last purchases with some of that gold. I ran into gold seekers riding up in the school session herding, and he had his ear things on, and he had his little wand looking for stuff. Early in the morning, we had to get the cattle out of the bottom of the City of Rocks to get them up and across the road and get them on that mountain behind Bath Rock. And we'd start real early because if it wasn't cool, you just couldn't get them out of there. And I rode around the rock, and there he was, and he had these headphones on, and he was waving that around, and I rode right up behind him until he could feel my horse's breath on his neck, and he tumbled to the ground and turned around like a mountain lion was, but he was looking for the treasure. Okay, let's turn over to the Bronsons here briefly. I have my grandmother's. Not only did she write the books, but she wrote an awesome history. Okay? And she tells all about Yost and all her young days in Yost, who were there, and about the community and about Almo. So we're related. Yeah.
What was her name? Is that Lucy Bronson? Sarah Lucy?
Yeah, okay. Sarah Lucy Bronson. Let's see, number one. Well, let me just start by saying the Bronsons joined a church in Michigan. Okay, and there was a lot of persecution going on there, but they were baptized in Michigan, and they came west with the Saints in 1850. They went to winter quarters and then came across and that's how the Bronsons came, originally from New York, then to there, and then they came to Salt Lake City. Way back. I get going through here, you know, and I didn't even know I was related to Ellis Parish. Ethel Durfee was a daughter of Sarah Bronson. I mean, you start going through all this, and you got to look at the individual names and see what's on each one of the columns, because their story isn't in here, but their names are in here because they're part of the descendants.
A lot of those stories are on Family Search. I've looked at Ethel.
Yeah,
She wrote a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So Sarah Couture Bronson lived in Nils' house.
Uh-huh.
That would be your grandma's cousin.
Yeah, and Etta Viola Jones Taylor, and she wrote a story in here about her life for my grandmother. It had to have been like pulling teeth to ask these people to write a few pages about themselves. She didn't make it up, but she was baptized 12th June 1915 and confirmed a member. Lover of books. She was a principal at Malta. The current year, this is 1960 when she got a hold of Etta. She was currently the principal of the Malta Elementary School. But anyway, it goes on to tell a lot about her and her life. But my grandmother had to have approached her and said, "Look, I'm writing a book. I need you to give me some things." So anyway, I thought that was interesting. Clint and his younger brother Clint Marsh and George Marsh together filed on a piece of land a little southwest of Almo and near the City of Rocks. Here they built a house. I did not know that. Later, George and his young wife and 3 children moved on a ranch 7 miles west of Yost, Utah, and Clint remained to make this little spot of earth his home. His ranch bordered one of the greatest pine nut areas in the world. And then a lot of stories in here tell about the Indians and pine nut gathering. The Indians were here gathering them, and the people who lived here were gathering them. But anyway, I didn't realize that George Marsh's first home was right near here, near the City of Rocks. So that was news to me. And then George, in his own writings, in his life history, on returning to Raft River Valley, George found work at different places, having to shift from here and there to keep himself employed. He always felt welcome at the home of his wife's mother, so again spent some time there. George staked off a quarter section of land at Yost, intending to make it their home. He was not yet prepared to make improvements until he could save enough money to build a cabin on it. He was threatened with a contest, so relinquished his claim to Rudolph Walters for a small sum, which thing he always regretted. At that time, shrewd men with a few $100s in ready cash would prey on the young homesteaders. With misinterpretations of the law and threats of contest, they caused many to weaken. This farm turned out to be a profitable investment, located as it was on an independent stream of water and with an abundance of range and timber nearby. So that was his account of getting to Yost. Oh, I'm tied to the Cahoons too. To Joseph Cahoon. It just, yeah, I mean, you just start, yeah. The Durfees, man, they're all over in here. I mean, it is. Let's see, the Taylors, and we're tied into Joneses too. Cleon's wife Opal was a Jones. Lita, who married Labar, George Marsh's brother. Lamar was, but you just tied in because you're looking through all the names, and you're going, oh wait, yeah, I recognize that. Oh, and the Brackenberries names too. You just go figure. Durfees, Alda D, Cleon W, Colleen J, Lacey E, Earl E, Ethel B, and then there's a bunch of LeVar and a bunch under that. Zod, Erlene, Gerbil, Glenna, Judy, Fern. Those sound familiar?
They're on the other line, they're on
Okay.
Deanne's line.
Eugene Durfee's line.
Okay. But anyway, it was interesting going through and just, I don't have any Ericksons.
When are we gonna get into?
We're going right into it right now.
We're gonna do the Bronsons now.
We're right now. Hey, how's my time running?
I'm looking for Artie Bronson.
What about Charles?
He was my
Yeah,
bus
Artie's a
driver.
brother. Yeah, he's a brother.
What?
Artie was a brother of George Marsh, of my grandmother, Artie, Uncle Artie.
Okay, well, he was my bus driver for at least 10 years.
Wow.
Because I lived in South Elba, I was an orphan. All of the blizzards came from that way, so I had to go to Elba.
Okay. There's a lot in here I'm not going to read about how hard life was. I'll editorialize when I go through it, but life was hard. They suffered. I mean, you talk about the people that came west in 1848 when they lined up there in February. They didn't even know where they were going. They were leaving the country. Utah was part of the Spanish territory. But there's 2,000 of their names right there at the end of the Trail of Hope. Those that just perished on the way. But these settlers out here did not have it easy. The Dan Ranch, later the Bronson Ranch, was located about 7 miles west of Yost, Utah, in Box Elder County. Are they calling Yost, Utah, over at George Creek? Because I have a hard time getting 7 miles out of it.
Probably
Oh,
about
if you-
that.
Yeah, from like where the schoolhouse. and
Yeah, is it
that,
about,
Probably 7 miles
is it? Okay.
west.
Over there, okay. I just worried that their measurement system, they don't have an
It
odometer.
depends, if they had to walk it, maybe it was 10 miles.
Okay, very good. There were high cedar hills nearby on the east of it and mountains circling near the south and west. A 5-mile stretch of sagebrush lay to the north through which one traveled by buggy, a wagon and team, or by horseback, past the Boost, B-E-U-S ranch to Almo, Idaho, a small village some 15 miles north which nestled at the foot of a lofty Mount Independence. A creek of clear water ran northward through the fields of our ranch. Its source to what we called the head of the spring was southeast of our 2-room house in the foothills a mile away. The red birch and willows, some of which were large and elegant, formed a shady retreat along the grassy banks of the stream. My father and mother held squatters' claim to this land. So squatters' claim must be homesteaders, I guess. Squatters' claim,
I would think it would be somebody coming in maybe on, I mean, that you did homesteaded, but a squatter
Yeah.
sometimes came in and took over somebody else's homestead that
Okay.
hasn't proved up yet.
well, anyway, she says my father and mother, which would be George Marsh and Laura Emily, they laid squatters' claim to the land. They had moved here from the Clint Bronson place at Reed Springs on Raft River near Almo. It was just such a time, 4 a.m., December 24th, 1893, Christmas Eve morning, 5 below zero and snow outside, when I was born. This is Sarah Lucy. My Uncle Orson Reed, mother's youngest brother, and my oldest brother, George, were sitting in the 8x12 lean-to room, which Father had built with pine boards to the west side of our big log room, and which at that time was serving as sleeping quarters for the boys. At the bottom in the footnote, the Reed Springs were named after my mother's father, Elijah Clinton Reed, son of Jesse Porter and Mary Rush Reed. My mother's mother, Sarah Miranda Bates, was the daughter of Ormus Ephraim, and Marilla Spaint Bates was the daughter of Ormus, and she's going through the line. But anyway, they were all sturdy pioneers. On the morning of my birth, Mrs. Sarah Howell and her 3 oldest daughters, Maddie, Sarah, and Libby, who lived in Raft River Canyon, 3 miles southwest of our homes. And that would be the Narrows, what we call the Narrows, wouldn't it? Came to breakfast time, the sleigh and team of horses. In early September or late August, my parents would make their annual trip to Bigham City or Willard, Utah with team and wagon to bring back loads of fruit. And she goes on to say, I mean, you had to go get your provisions for the winter, and they would bring back the fruit and vegetables and things. You couldn't grow everything in your garden, so to get by the winter, they would have to, and later on, they did the same. I didn't know there was a mill in Elba, but there was a wheat mill in Elba. They would make it into flour, but they had to make an annual pilgrimage because you had to last the entire winter, clear till spring, and of course, you're not growing much in your garden. We have a short growing season around here. So you kind of got to get by, she says, for about 8 months on what you put away for the winter.
Grandma said that a lot of the orchards would have wood stoves, and so you would take your canning bottles down and
Yeah.
can the fruit there in the orchard.
Yeah, and then bring it back.
Yeah, bring it back in the bottles.
Yep. She said her house consisted of one big log room and a lean-to, which I have previously mentioned. Our modest abode was covered with a dirt roof where weeds and grass grew in the summer. Excess rain or melting snow in springtime would cause water to seep through the clean, whitewashed areas of the ceilings, and then of course you had to move the beds and put pans and everything when it rained hard, where there was a lot of moisture to take care of it. Then she goes on to talk about how it was furnished. Everybody had a big cook stove. Obviously there were iron things hanging from the wall and spoons. Straw mattresses. They would fill them with clean straw 2 or 3 times a year. Feathers were a coveted item. And you'd save all the chicken, any feathers you could save. They'd make pillows out of them. But George Marson and Luce made theirs bed out of feathers. So that was quite
Dave, you keep
Yes.
saying George Marsh, was his last name?
Bronson,
Bronson, okay.
George Marsh. Okay, anyway, it was a happy day for us children when Father and Mother brought home the light Oakwood ESTEY organ with a mirror and places to put some vases and ornaments. You know, my grandmother learned to play the piano. Her and my Aunt Delpha learned to play the piano. In fact, later on she's going to say she was playing at the dances when she was 10. Anyway, I learned to play quickly. As a family, we were musically inclined. I've been to many of the Bronson family reunions. A lot of you probably know my cousins. Okay, Lamar, who married Lita Jones, Opal's sister, lived down in View. Sherry and Charlene are my second cousins. Ray and Reuben, and they've been up here playing in our church at dances, but they're all very musically inclined. I wish I'd have got it. With my help on the organ at 10 years old and more, we made music for the country dances at Yost. When I was 11 years old, Delph and I rode double on horseback on George's bay pony to the home of Bishop Henry Blackburn Jr. and his wife Eliza Richens Blackburn of Grouse Creek, Utah, to take our music lessons. It was 8 miles to the home of the Blackburns in George Creek Canyon above Yost. We made the 16-mile round trip once each week, taking 9 or 10 lessons in all. That was the summer of 1905. That was May, June, and July. During the summer of 1904 in July, August, and September, there was a terrible epidemic of typhoid fever in Almo. Nearly every home was stricken with the dread disease. Often 2 or 3 members of the same family could die within a week or so. Many times, two bodies would be taken silently to the cemetery in one day. Aunt Sam Bronson died, leaving a large family. 3 of her children were bedfast and very ill and could not attend her funeral. The coffin maker of Almo, Henry R. Cahoon, was hard-pressed to keep enough wooden coffins to bury the dead. It was the latter part of July that year. I was gathering alfalfa to feed the pigs in a pen when suddenly my legs and feet gave way. And that was her catching the fever. And then she goes on to tell how awful it was, and it lasted for weeks. Even Bishop Blackford came. He and my father laid hands on my head and prayed for me. My father was then the bishop's second counselor in the Yost ward. My mother was counselor in the YLMIA. Why is it YLMIA? She uses that more than once.
Young ladies.
Young ladies, that might be, yes. The bishop told me that he would fast for me for 3 days and nights. I had faith in the Lord. I knew that he healed me. How am I doing on time?
You got 20 more minutes.
No, Alice's sister, Opal, married to Blackburn.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and see, you're slightly older than me, some of you, and these names are more familiar than they are to me. The names in 61 when I got here are quite familiar, but a lot of them, are just not familiar. By September, I was well enough to go to school in Yost. Delph and I rode the horse the whole 7 miles to school and 7 miles home. It was during the month of September. In October, my folks rented a house near by the schoolhouse. We lived there until April 1st, then moved back to the ranch, the Dan Ranch. They tried to get close to the school, live close to the school, so the kids didn't. You spent most of your time sitting on the back of the horse. We seldom had more than 6 or 7 months schooling each year. Some winters we moved to Almo to attend school. Then we could associate each day with our cousins there. The Rock Meeting House and grounds at Yost afforded most of our social gatherings, also our spiritual growth, attending Sunday school, primary, and religion classes and such. I remember when we 3 little girls, Delpha, Myrtle, and I, with our hair in curls, wearing fluffy yellow dresses, which Mother made for us on the old Singer sewing machine. And I have that old Singer sewing machine. My wife hasn't sewed me anything on it yet, quite. Attended children's dances and picnics in the afternoon of holiday celebrations. Oh, the Rock Mason was Mr. Beus Boos, father of Daniel, David, and Willis, and Nettle Buse Montgomery were the rock masons over in Yost that built the rock structures. My father worked as a foreman for Mr. John Blythe, a kind-hearted old Scotchman with side whiskers and a deep Scottish brogue who had many herds of sheep. There was lots of sheep accounts. And the sheep and the cattlemen didn't get along. Go figure. Okay?
He turns out to be really a wealthy guy, and he's mentioned in the Prominent Men of Idaho or something. He bought a hotel down in Burley.
Oh, okay.
And was,
But anyway, Mr. Blythe owned a ranch home at Yost where large, multicolored, diamond-shaped squares were painted under the pointed gable of his roof.
Dave, I live in that house.
Really? Cool. Where is it? I need to come over and, is it still
We covered
up?
it up with, we live in it, it's covered
Yeah,
in
but is it
siding.
still up?
Well, you want the house?
The house?
I live in it.
Oh, you live in it?
Yes.
Oh, that's what I said, I lived. Past tense, okay, cool. So that's the house. The job took my father away from home for weeks at a time. She talks about, 9 cows having to be milked morning and night. You have to herd the cattle out, bring them back in. Vegetable gardens, pigs, chickens, lambs, mow, rake, shock, and stack the hay and grain in the fall, leppy lamb, she called them leppy lambs. I always called them leppy calves, and we always called the lambs bum, but back then they called them leppy calves, or leppy lambs. They made nipples from shoe leather, sewing them into shape and fitting them over the neck of pop bottles filled with warm milk. That was how they bottle fed them. But anyway, she went on to talk about, life was an absolute challenge. Everybody worked daylight till dark. One year we raised 75 lambs at the ranch. They had 100 ewes. George Marsh had 100 ewes on the ranch. In the summer, my sister Myrtle and I were the sheep herders, and we watched over the sheep in daytime in nearby meadows and foothills, and they watched out for them sly coyotes. That's where I come in. In September, it was pine nut time. The surrounding country near Almo and the City of Rocks was always said to be the greatest pine nut region in the world. Indians would travel to the pine nut hills in pony caravans, many Colorado and Pinto horses with ridos, some of the squaws with papooses and children walking with packs and sacks, following one behind another, would form a slow-moving line, 1/2 to 1/4 mile long. These tribal Lamanites would pass along the trail at the north end of our field. Later, we would see many smoke fires on the hilltops. The Indians would gather, shell, and roast the pine nuts, then sell them to the settlers along the stores. They also carried many sacks of nuts home for their own winter food. And many of you probably know, but pine nuts are very, very nutritious. And they're very important to grizzly bears and other animals as well. Old Frank Injun, we called him, was black and dirty. He came often to our place. Mother always gave him food. Also Susie Squaw, that would probably be his wife. She would ask for bread and dried apples. We gave her most anything she asked for. We were always glad when the two of them were gone. Susie carried a knife, but she seemed to be harmless enough. She said, "Me Paiute." So, I knew the Blackfeet and Shoshone, but I didn't know the Paiutes were here. Oh, they talked in here a lot about fishing over in the Raft River Narrows. And they would go catch like 100 of these trout. They would smoke them, they would eat them. Anyway, there's still fish there today. She talks a lot about butter making, bread, cakes, cookies, pastries. There's no bakeries or butcher shops. Life was hard trying to preserve the meat and keep the meat. Chicken was as she says right here, we ate mutton and salted pork. Chicken was a luxury. You want to try to keep your chickens around for the eggs. In November, my father would kill a venison, and they would smoke it and make it into jerky for the winter. Pigs were butchered. She talks all about what they do with the skin and the fat and a lot of things. They would go into cedar groves nearby with mother and dig roots of sago lilies. How come I don't know what a sago lily is?
It's a state
White.
flag.
Yeah, it's white. You have to dig down deep to get the bulb. And with her dual shovel or spade, she would dig into the hard earth 10 or 12 inches deep before we could reach the small white round bulbs. Have you ate them? How do you know what they are? And I don't.
I
Sago lilies. Anyway, there's a little
Similar
white
to
bulb and it's edible.
The camas.
It's about the size of a marble.
I know what they are, but I've never ate the bulbs.
Okay, but anyway, that's what they would eat, is the bulbs. Mother frequently made clothes for me from coats and dresses given to her by more prosperous neighbors. Many of our undies were made from clean, white flour sacks. In the summertime, we oftentimes went barefooted, except on Sundays. In the fall, Father would haul a load of wheat to the grist mill at Conant, near the town of Elba, Idaho, on Cassia Creek. The miller would grind the wheat into flour, making the wheat cereal from the hulls. The sacks Father brought back would be our supply of winter's flour. And flour is extremely nutritious, and the saints coming across the plains had plenty of flour.
So where's Conant? Where would you pinpoint that?
She didn't
I've
pinpoint
been
it.
to
She
that
just
town.
says,
Said it was by Nova.
You know
it said
where-
it's on Cassia Creek near
You know where
Elba.
Brandy Taylor lives?
Uh-huh.
It's just this west
Head
of
of
it.
Two Malta.
Uh-huh.
There's actually a sign right along the
Oh,
road.
I've seen that, okay.
Little wood sign,
That's where they did
and if you were to go back through the fence back in there, that area, back in those trees, you can't see it.
There's a spring, right?
No, they ran water from Cassia Creek up around the hill. If you look, you can see where the ditch went up around. And it got up there behind those trees, and that's where it came down through the race into the mill. But that area back in there is all rocked up. You can't see any of the rock or anything from the road, but it's laid up with rock and like brick, almost like brick.
So that was where the mill was.
That's where the mill was.
So you can see the remnants of where.
Oh, yeah, you can still see
Okay.
Once they built the bridge, then the settlers would come, at first they would come through here and then through Albion and over, or else through Oakley. Once they built the bridge, then they started going through Albion, and Conant was a stage stop and a
Oh, okay.
hotel, and was quite a prosperous little community.
Okay.
So there's a sign. What is the sign?
It talks about
Scout
Conant,
project, and we put it-
yeah.
It's
Uh,
getting more out. I stopped and took a
as
picture
you're-
the other day.
As you're going down through there's some new homes down on the opposite side there, but it's where the road hits the bottom, gets the lowest point there, and it kind of comes up and curves. But there's a bunch of
Cottonwood.
cottonwood trees right in there, and that sign is in the fence on the north side of the road, right there, and that's where it is.
Well, how observant I am. I've driven
One
down
other
there.
thing, they had
10,000.
a flour mill here in Alma prior to that.
Oh, I didn't know that either.
It was over where
Blacks.
no, that was the cheese factory. It's over here at my dad's milking barn.
Oh,
Used to be
okay.
the old flour mill
It
here.
was
Oh,
Johnny
cool.
Listen.
So they grind it right there. Okay. You're taking my time, so I'm adding another minute.
You have more time.
Okay. A well was finally dug for pure drinking water. We drew water with a rope pulley and a bucket. We also use a well for refrigeration. They put the food in the bucket, of course, and lower it down near the water. And of course, being down that far in the earth, and the earth has a constant temperature of 55 degrees down there, besides the water would be cool. So that was kind of their refrigerator. And then she goes into, I've often wondered why many people today don't know the taste of cornmeal, such as lumpy dick. And then she goes through a whole paragraph of exactly how you make lumpy dick. It didn't sound very appetizing nor good to me. Okay, the house faced north toward Almo in the Long Desert Valley. The 1/8 paned window was near the door. The garden gate was a small flower garden on each side, was directly in front of the house. There was sweet, odorous clump of green leaves called Sweet Mary. We were allowed a leaf each day if we desired for smelling purposes. I mean the treat. I gotta smell this. I mean, think about it. These kids today, here's your leaf. This is your treat for the day. Now smell it and enjoy it all day. My father was a good gardener. His trees always grew. He planted a row of Lombardy poplars in front of the house by the garden fence. Now, the first time I was over there was poplars, some of them had laid down, but anyway.
Did you see a homestead or what do you call it, a foundation or anything?
Yeah. Yeah, long time ago. She took us over there.
Oh, did she?
Yeah, but yeah, everything was imploded, but there were still remnants of what was there. He called them, let's see, he planted a row of Lombardy poplars in front of the house by the garden, then 2 spreading trees near the house. He called them Bama Gillards. There was a long row of gooseberry bushes and currant bushes, 2 plum trees, and 1 sour cherry tree, which the robins claimed in cherry time. They had rhubarb. Seemed like rhubarb. It came up in the book several times, so rhubarb grows easy in this climate, and so I guess
What was the name of that tree, Bama what?
Bamigillards, Bama Gillards. Early on a Sunday morning we arose. It was one of Mother's happy days of anticipation. As a seemingly improper Christian, she would say with eyes shining, Artie, bring in the wood and heat for baths. Myrtle, feed the chickens and wipe dishes for your sister. Sarah, draw water and bring in the tub. Viola, watch your baby brother. Delpha, strain the milk and put it in the cellar when George brings it. I must lay out your father's clothes. He's out harnessing the team now, putting clean straw in the wagon bed. We will have a white top buggy next month, like the Montgomerys. Little coveting going on back then, huh? The Rock Meeting House was only one big room. The Sunday school teachers would draw curtains throughout the room on wires to create separate classrooms. Our lesson in my class would be the burning of the prophet Abinadi from the Book of Alma and the Book of Mormon. I loved to read about the prophet Abinadi. While class was going on, we could hear voices from all the other classes, the teachers all giving lessons. And then she goes on for a few more pages on how hard life was. I mean, you look at our lives today and everything, but they paint a picture. They paint a picture for you. And she gives enough detail that she doesn't just put a tree and a bush in. She gives enough detail that you're going, oh my gosh, this, how do you make it through those times? George, my eldest brother, was called on a mission to the Central States in August 1906. He was only 19 years old. People in the Yost Ward gathered at our house to give him a farewell party. So many good friends. The Frank and Mary Jane Meekum family. That's the first time I saw Meekums brought up. The Tracys, the Blackburns and Montgomerys, the Yates, Chadwicks, Lynns, Andersons, Buses, Omans, and many more. They gave money to help the cause. George's calf, George Marsh had a bunch of calves and some sheep he'd accumulated. He sold them to help fund his mission, but she continues to talk about the difficulties in making sure they had funds to fund that mission, how difficult it was throughout her life story. In June of that same year, my Uncle Orson Reed, Mother's youngest brother, had married a lovely LDS girl, Alice Tracy, in the Logan Temple and moved to Basin east of Oakley. He and his father-in-law, Joseph Franklin Tracy, went on a mission to the southern states and following January 1907. And they leave their families. When you're Nauvoo and you start 11 of the 12 apostles were on missions all at one time. You look at the sacrifice they made. Brigham Young's dear wife. It's amazing, but these pioneers, they're going on missions. It hasn't ended. The spreading of the gospel is still going on, and they're still calling people on missions. In those early days, certain word conferences were impressed by my memory. One of those was at Yost, Utah in October 1906. Our stake headquarters was at Oakley, Idaho. William T. Jack was the stake president. At this particular word conference, President Jack, Professor A.M. Merrill, principal of the Kansas Stake Academy, and Brother Saul Worthington were our stake visitors. Among their purposes for coming was to encourage the young people in the ward to attend the Cassia Stake Academy. that was located in Oakley. Father had been away for 4 weeks with Uncle Jim Bronson and his sheep. Money had to be sent to George for his mission. Father was tending to that, but we were in distress for food and clothing for the coming winter. They're on the Dan Ranch in Yost. Mother talked to the state visitors, and they thought to move to Oakley to school where we could all find work, because that was a good thing, providing all the family were willing. Father did not come home that week, so Mother and we girls loaded our furniture into the wagon. The cook stove was so heavy that it could hardly be loaded. We prayed and then found a way to load it. We harnessed a team of horses and hooked them to the wagon early one morning. With Mother driving most of the way, we began our 35-mile journey over the mountains, through canyons, on dusty, dry desert roads. I assume they probably went down Birch Creek, to Oakley, Idaho. Aunt Benny Bates lived there. She was friendly and sweet. Also the Critchfields. They were such nice folks. These people were close kin to my maternal grandmother, Sarah Miranda Bates Reed. We moved into a small 2-room house where there was an orchard in the back of the big 2-story rock house with Brother William and Sister Dorcas Whittle Lee. Anyway, she talks about peeling apples now. Now you're closer. It takes a long time to get fruit trees up and growing and bearing fruit. So, some people got theirs going earlier than others, but now this is a huge blessing. They get to Oakley, and now there's a bunch of fruit trees for which you can harvest, in your backyard.
So did she say what happened when the father came home?
Yes, we're getting to it. Okay.
The stove is gone.
Yeah. Yeah. Where's my wife? There weren't cell phones then. Anyway, we started going to the academy, but with my having only finished the 6th grade, this is my grandmother, I was 2 years behind all the other students. Schooling was a huge problem for these early settlers. Father sent some money, but we were a large family. He came to Oakley and at first was unhappy because we had moved. Okay, sometimes it just takes a woman to figure it out. Okay? Because she did figure it out. And he said, but finally he realized the advantage for all of us, as we could now work and earn money to keep ourselves in clothes. So that is where they finally left Yost, and now they're living in Oakley. And then they go on to Hazleton, and she marries my grandfather, but that is the history of the Bronsons as it was conducted here in the late 1800s and early 1900s. So there's a whole lot of Bronsons over in a cemetery, and they're all my relatives. Some are my great-great-grandfathers. I got a great-great-grandmother over there. I got a lot of great-great-uncles and great-uncles.
In the Yost Cemetery?
No, in the Alamo Cemetery. So, and there's some Bowdens buried over there as well.
So Quentin Donnerell was George Marsh's father.
Yes.
Where is he? Was he in the area buried? Or
He is buried in Soda Springs.
Oh.
Is where he's buried. So, anyway.
So how did they get here to the Yost area? Was it his father first? And then
Yeah,
left?
they came from Ogden, Utah. Then they wound up in Park Valley
Oh.
and Snowville area. They were in Kelton for a while, but that's how they came to be here. Is the migration west to Salt Lake, and then they scattered. But anyway, they spent some times at Locomotive Springs. But anyway, they settled in Yost.
So now where you guys live now, is that part of your line somehow?
The king is not. The Bronsons, 2 of them worked for Albert King and worked on the King Ranch.
Oh.
But no, I can't find anywhere where relatives of the Kings. So,
The only ones, huh?
yeah, probably the
So
only
far.
ones so far.
Unless it's the Eames.
But I remember Fawn and her playing the organ, and Ted used to come out and watch my brother and I haul the hay, and he'd want to go over to the Lyman field and go see things, and so my brother and I would drive him around, and he had great stories, and, you know, he went back a long ways. And I hope somebody, you know, I guess if we went over on Family Search, because lots of stories are showing up on Family Search. You can go grab any one of these names, and if you know their date of birth and death, you can go, and people are putting a lot, this is already on there, a lot of recordings. If you want to hear me singing Davy Crockett with my brother when I'm 5 years old, why, you can go listen to that, because it's on there. Yeah.
So are you related? You're related to Ray and Reuben, but what about the sheep farmers, the Bronsons down there in Butte?
We're related to them. I'm not sure which way we connect to them.
I think it's a generation back.
So, but yeah, Ray and Reuben and Sherry and Charlene.
Yeah.
And Del Jean she passed away, was their oldest sister. Lamar died at an early age. So,
And Lamar was.
yeah, and Sherry and Charlene came and lived with us when I was in high school in Pocatello and went to Idaho State University.
Oh, really?
But she's got her fingers on the computer.
Do you?
I'm sure, you know, I'm not a genealogist. I'm sure all your husbands are, you know, way into it, way more than you. I'm sure, you know. But I'll tell you, I'm eternally grateful for a grandmother that in the 50s and 60s started writing about all our lines and gathering stories from all those people and researching it. And my mother even hired professional genealogists to help gather a lot of the information. But anyway, and the Nichols, I didn't bring that book, but the Nichols, all four of the main lines she wrote books on.
Are you related to those two?
Yes.
Okay.
You didn't tell us about the massacre.
The what?
You didn't tell us about the massacre. You said-
Oh, the massacre's in the book. I could have read it to you. It's similar. They just got off Alamo Creek and the woman and the baby, but it's told from an Indian told it to them.
Well,
So,
that's what we want to hear is that side.
well, I'd have to find it.
Well, we've got time.
Just a second,
You've got
let me
5 more
look.
minutes.
Oh, gads, we're doing all
You're
right.
doing great.
Before you go there, now, do you, when I read that, they lost their place, she and her husband,
Chances here.
and they ended up living in a Quonset or something? Do you
Who-
remember
who?
that story? Lucy, I'm thinking. It
I-
seemed like the.
I didn't see it in the book. I read the whole book, but it could have happened.
No, it was in just a short.
Oh, it might have been. It's not in the
And it might
book.
have been on somebody else. But,
Yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, I think the Indian Massacre is in the Reed family history. And it, you know, it's funny. I read about that. I said, it is just funny. They've talked to Bill about it, face to face. They talked to Phyllis about it too. You know, the news were here and everybody's in this up. You know, there's not enough documentation. 2 weeks ago, I even looked up the massacre over at Massacre Rocks and read about it because I'm like some of you, I've never stopped and gone through that state park and read everything about what took place there. So anyway, just a second, it's here.
Is this in Family Search by chance? In the Reed family?
No, I think it's in this Reed book. Now, let me tell you, the Bronson book has all been scanned in, this entire book, by the church. Okay, it's already part of the record. I don't know if the Reed book has been scanned in. I only learned that today, that book was scanned by the church. Okay, so I don't know if these others are, but there's lots of books that get scanned, people that do early research. My grandmother dedicated her life to those books. I mean, when you went to her house, I remember the big rubber tree plant, and I remember weeding at the chicken coop, getting the eggs in her cook. Well, grandfather did probably most of the breakfast cooking. She did, but she had the table was just strewn with the histories that she was. And in the old days, you're trying to get back 4 generations, right? But in the old days, we didn't have computers or anything. They looked like this. Okay? And now, they look like this. Okay? So, anyway, and that's me. But my mother has one, my grandmother has one, and of course, you get your fan chart, but it only has 6 generations. But, you know, they're getting dropped off, but the fan chart could be, in my case, 8 generations going back. So, anyway. And is it all accurate? Absolutely not. Okay? It is not accurate. Okay? I'm going to go there. It doesn't bother me. Sometimes you might have an illegitimate child or something goes foo-paw and it don't get in the book. Okay? And then your mother, you know, I'm in my 60s and I'm in McCall, Idaho. And
D.C.
where were we?
Washington, D.C.
Or Washington, D.C. She comes back to see us, and I'm showing her all around Washington, and then she tells me about my Uncle Robert.
There's a picture too.
Yeah, I gave me a picture of my Uncle Robert, and she had to wait till my grandfather Ellis Bowden, Sarah Lucy's husband, died, and then, you know, the skeletons all came running out of the closet. It was quite comical, to say the least. But no mention of Uncle Robert in here, okay? There were some things better left unsaid back then.
Well, somehow, the bus
Yeah, the massacre.
from Almo
Okay.
came through Elba, all through the 8th grade for me. And then I was first year of high school at Malda, and a fellow named Artie Bronson.
Uncle Artie is George Marsh's brother.
Pardon me?
He's George Marsh Bronson's brother, the guy that we're talking about, the father of, he's a brother of Sarah Lucy Bronson. Uncle Artie.
Well, how did he somehow get from Almo to that bus and drive to Malda?
He probably
And
lived
he
here.
must have lived somewhere. and
He
I don't
he
know.
probably lived right here in Almo, because when grandmother would come over here to go to the schools, she loved it because her cousins all lived here in Almo. She didn't say who lived,
Larry
which.
Henson lives.
Pardon?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
They what?
Where Larry Henson lives.
yeah.
Oh, right, okay. See?
Who was that?
See? Some of you are just slightly older than me, and that helps.
Well, somehow Artie drove the bus to Malda, and then when Ephraim Miller went from Malda to Albion, Elba and Almo went with him. So Artie Bronson drove the bus still, and he showed up mysteriously, lived here somewhere, and drove the bus. And the only other school bus driver I had clear up through high school in Albion was Cleve Lloyd. He drove the bus when I was a junior to senior that year. But Artie Bronson, yeah, 11 years. Now, I lived South Elba, and my first grade teacher was, what? War.
Hey, let me read this story and then we'll talk about this, okay? I'm going to tell you about the Indians' account of the massacre. And it's dedicated to the memory of those who lost their lives in the most horrible Indian massacre, 1861. 300 immigrants westbound. It kind of goes with the lead in. This was written, erected by the sons and the daughters of the Utah Pioneers, 1993. William Ed Johnston, who lived in Alamo, Cassia, Idaho, could speak the Shoshone Indian language well enough to be understood, and from an old Indian he was able to get what I deem version of the battle, which in part incorporated the following story. William Ed Johnston and my grandfather Elijah League, L-I-G-E, Clinton Reed, were the first persons to come upon the scene of tragedy after the ominous massacre. These two were riding the range on horseback. There they found pieces of wagons, tires, etc., also holes that had been dug for protection, as well as to try to obtain water to drink. The Indians' account of the massacre. In the spring of 1861, an immigrant train left the Missouri River bound for California. It was equipped as nearly as possible with everything necessary to make a safe trip through an unsettled country infested with Indians. The train consisted of more than 60 wagons and 300 souls. Nothing is known of the early part of their trip until they reached the western plains, where they were harassed by Indians, whom they were able to keep at bay through their well-organized camp, their driving management, and their equipment of arms. This gave them added courage, and they looked on the Indians, who at first were small in number, with indifference, and sometimes they took shots at them at long range to keep them away, all of which angered those Indians. This, together with the natural antipathy which they held for the white man, coupled with the desire to destroy the train and possess all of its belongings, caused a general uprising of the numerous Indians whose habits were adjacent to the Oregon Trail. Indian runners were sent out and signal smokes were sent up. The place of concentration was the Indian Grove, some 4 or 5 miles northwest of Alamo Creek. According to the Indians' account, there were assembled here the largest number of hostile Indians ever known in these parts. Here they provisioned their camp with game meat, which was plentiful, and waited for the condemned train. The immigrants traveled over the Oregon Trail until they crossed the Raft River, where their guide headed them south over the Sublette Cutoff to the California Road. They traveled peacefully for 3 short days without sighting any Indians, and then camped for the night on Alamo Creek, so named by the Indians, signifying plenty water. This year, plenty water. I don't know where they got the name the last two. Where now nestles a peaceful village of Alamo. Here they took their usual precautions, made a corral of their wagons, placed strong guards over their stock, and slept peacefully, not knowing that an overwhelmingly band of bloodthirsty Indians were looking down upon them from Indian Grove. A large elevated mountain bench, finely timbered to this day, retains that name. The outpost of the Red Man watched with impatience as the immigrants lighted their morning fire inside their wagon enclosure. They watched the herdsmen drive their stock to camp and harness for the day's journey. The line of defense was broken in each wagon, falling into its allotted position in almost military precision. The Indians were in readiness. They were about to attack a foe much superior in both arms and ammunition. They had a few guns and small quantities of ammunition, but they depended on their greater number, their bows, their arrows, and their well-planned mode of attack. This talking of the Indians. The Indians allowed the train, as it moved slowly southward from a stream of water, to proceed until its rear wagon was some distance from the creek. Suddenly, a prearranged signal was given from the Indian lookout, and warriors and braves in great numbers emerged from their places of concealment, where they had lurked in silence and secrecy. They completely surrounded surprised immigrants, who immediately gave orders for all the wagons to be corralled with all stock inside that enclosure. This was accomplished in spite of the hair-raising yells of the bloodthirsty savages who knew they had committed the first act of their contemplated tragedy. The savages now had the immigrant train cut off from water, and so the siege therefore began. It was not to be a fight where man was given for man, but was fought Indian fashion, each red man protecting himself, reserving his ammunition, and keeping the train under siege until the immigrants had exhausted their own ammunition and were absolutely famished for water. A large portion of the attackers secretly retired to their camps at Indian Grove, leaving only enough of their tribesmen to hold the siege, and from protected points of vantage picked off with arrows or guns any immigrant who attempted to escape or to try to get water. And their thirst was great, as was a hot July sun bore down by day. In relays, the Indians, for day and night, harassed the whites with arrows, guns, and firebrands shot into the wagons, and otherwise terrorized them by yells which were joined by the entire war parties. This was intended to impress upon the minds of the confused immigrants the overwhelming majority of the Indians. The immigrants, realizing their plight, dug a trench under each wagon and threw dirt to the outside. The digging of a well was started in hopes of getting water. This work was carried on feverishly until it proved disappointing to them. Men who undertook to bring water from the creek were shot down. Occasional shots from the hostile tribesmen killed or badly wounded some of the white men, woman or child. This threw members of the besieged party into greater excitement and grief. The excitement grew intense as panic-stricken horses in their struggles broke their fastenings and ran frantically around the enclosure, while others in their attempts to break loose were snorting, rearing, and trampling the earth, from which arose great columns of dust, through which frantic women and children darted hither and thither in their aimless attempts for relief. This, with constant yelling of the Indians and howling of their dogs, made the scene too wild and awful to describe. On the third day, the stock was ordered to be turned from the enclosure. As they hastened for water, they were taken into the possession of the Indians. Little by little, the fighting force of the train was reduced, and the remainder contemplated the inevitable. It was on the fourth night that the guide employed by the train gave up all hopes and planned his own escape. He was accompanied by a young woman who displayed great courage and marksmanship. Under the protection of darkness, they crawled through the sagebrush, making their way to the mountains. After hours and hours of travel, they found their way to the settlement of Brigham City, Utah. In the after part of the same night, one man and two women, one with a nursing baby, secretly stole from the doomed camp, calling for miles on their hands and knees. Their mother of the baby, in her anguish and endeavor to keep in company with the others as they crawled through the brush, was compelled to take the garments of her child in her teeth and carry her in that manner. They were successful in making their escape, reaching a point on the Raft River, which was afterwards known as the EY Ranch, where they lived on wild rosebuds and roots until they were found by a rescue party from Brigham City, who sent them on into the settlement and proceeded to the battlegrounds of Alamo Creek to find the entire party slain and the wagons burned. The bodies of the unfortunate people were buried in the well which they themselves had dug.
Have you been to Indian Grove?
Oh, many, many, many times.
When you look down toward Alamo from Indian Grove, can you see Alamo?
It's hard to see Elmo, but you can see the flats out here a lot better than you can Elmo. And I don't know how high the trees were, but it is on a nice high flat at the top. Well, it's not, as you go up Graham, it's up to the end of Graham, it's up, but it is flat. But you have a hard time seeing close to Alamo, but out here on the flats.
Can you see by Ogren's area? Heard that's where it was.
Yeah, you can see the flats. What I need to do is go up there and take a picture. Look, there's a bench in front of all those trees that's brush. So there are some trees that's grown up and some quakies, and I don't know whether they were there then, but it's still an open flat right east of the grove itself.
What I'm seeing for all of us doing history things, here are volumes of very precious information.
Well, this is the Reed, my great-grandfather, who rode there and said they were, there's a lot of people there's a lot of people with an account of it. It's just...
Well, what we're doing now is going to the computers, and everything now is, stations and postings, and how does somebody find out where you're going to be when somebody comes looking for you? And not the sheriff, sheriff isn't the only one, but the information. And what we've done here at Alamo is the Durfees and the community have risen to the occasion and gone after the history of Alamo Raft River, the trails, the immigration and everything, and being able to post it and scan it and do something, and somebody will come along, and your work here is extensive and precious. And so the only way we can find out about Artie Bronson is some of memory, know him.
You could go get on Family Church. Uncle Artie's got a whole bunch of stuff about him. All those families, Uncle Wesley, inside your, this is all the mainline stuff, and then it all fans out, and hopefully, everybody else, all the other brother, somebody has researched that line, or maybe they've written books, but a lot of memories are going into Family Church. I mean, I got over there, it was a few days ago. It's amazing how much information there is.
Well, my brother Arlo was a trails expert. He could spot them at 55 miles an hour. And his work is recorded in the LDS library in Utah. And what the Durfers are finding out, what I'm finding out, his work didn't come back, and it's not in the closet at Arlo's son-in-law's house where Arlo lived. It's gone. Except, wait a minute, it's not gone. And then Carnahan did homestead history, Elba, Alamo, Albion, everything. And just recently, the Spencers here got the information to me of who proved up on homesteads, early settling in Junction Valley over there. And then World War I came along, and everybody came here, and the price of wheat in World War I was $2.50 a bushel. And at the end of the war, that was the going rate. By 1919, the price was 50 cents a bushel. So the people moved out. Now, grandsons and sons, or sons and daughters of those people, are coming and asking. And so we have the list, and now we have nice drawings of where people live, a lot of information.
Especially with homesteads and things where they're recorded. And the same with water rights. They're recorded. So you know who filed when, but
Who their
things that
neighbors
are,
were and all that.
yeah, officially. But Uncle Marsh says they were squatters.
Well, we'd sure like to thank Dave for his presentation tonight. It's getting
Anyway.
late and some
Now,
of you
for
need to
some
go home,
of us,
but
myself,
thank you for coming.
we've got to move right along. I have doctor's
We'll have another one next month
appointment.
on,
Yep.
I'll let you know.
I got one tomorrow too in Pontillo.
Stan goes to the doctor.
I don't know. I've been to the doctor more in the last 10 years than I did the previous 60. So
Well,
anyway,
the word is thank you.
you bet.
Thank you for coming.
I learned a lot. It was good. It was good exercise.
So it sounds like those Indians who traveled clear from just a long way.
Yeah, from a long ways. Yeah.
Albertsons over in Albion also tell about it. Pocatello